Picture the first light breaking over a quiet harbor. Fishermen prepare their nets. Mothers draw water from wells. Children play along the shore, their laughter carried on the salt air. It is an ordinary morning in a coastal village where life has unfolded the same way for generations. But within hours, everything will change. By nightfall, these same people will be chained in the holds of foreign ships, torn from everything they have ever known, carried toward a future of bondage across distant seas. This was not the plot of some dark fiction. This was the lived reality for countless men, women, and children during the age of piracy, when the sea brought not just trade and discovery, but terror. We often think of pirates as swashbuckling adventurers, rebels against empire, or romanticized outlaws of the open ocean. But the true history is far grimmer. Maritime raiders did not only plunder gold and cargo, they plundered lives. They swept through entire communities, seizing human beings as easily as they seized treasure. And among those taken, women faced horrors that went beyond captivity itself. They became currency. They became property. They became invisible. On the 17th of May, 1683, the Spanish port of Veracruz in New Spain was struck by one of the most brutal pirate assaults of the era. The attackers were led by two notorious figures, Laurens de Graaf and Nicholas van Horn. Their fleet consisted of 5 large vessels accompanied by several smaller craft. They did not come for a skirmish. They came to conquer. The town's fortifications fell quickly. The population was rounded up and locked inside churches. For days, they were denied food and water. Women were subjected to unspeakable abuses. Many were taken as hostages. According to surviving accounts, more than 6,000 local citizens were seized, held for ransom, or prepared for sale. The town was not just looted, it was harvested. Across the Atlantic, a different kind of terror unfolded under a different flag. The so-called Turkish abductions were carried out by North African corsairs, whose reach extended far beyond the Mediterranean. In June of 1627, a fleet of Barbary pirates descended upon the remote Westman Islands off the coast of Iceland. They landed without warning. They moved through the settlements methodically. 242 people were taken. Men, women, children, the elderly. None were spared. The captives were loaded onto ships and carried southward into a world they could not have imagined. Similarly, in the summer of 1629, 3 corsair ships raided the island of Suroy in the Faroes. More than 30 women and children were abducted. Some islanders were killed outright during the assault. The rest were left to mourn those who vanished. These raids were not random acts of violence. They were calculated operations targeting settlements that lacked strong defenses, coastal villages, isolated islands, places where help could not arrive in time. On the night of June 19th, 1631, the Irish village of Baltimore in West Cork became the site of one such catastrophe. Under the command of a Dutch-born convert named Murat Reis the Younger, corsairs swept through the town under cover of darkness. More than 100 men, women, and children were seized from their beds. They were dragged to the shore, loaded onto ships, and carried away. Most of them were never seen or heard from again. Families were shattered in a single night. An entire community was gutted. The scale of this phenomenon is staggering. Historians estimate that between 1500 and 1780, more than 1 million Europeans were captured by North African pirates and sold into forced labor or lifelong captivity. 1 million lives. 1 million stories erased. And within that vast number, women occupied a uniquely vulnerable position. They were separated from their families. They were held as hostages. They were sold into concubinage. They were used as bargaining tools in ransom negotiations. They were paraded through slave markets. They became commodities in a cruel and sprawling economy of human suffering. But even within this framework of exploitation, there existed a particularly disturbing practice. Some pirate commanders imposed marriage upon their female captives. This was not marriage in any recognizable sense. It was coercion dressed in the language of legitimacy. It was domination disguised as union. One of the few documented systems comes from the Chinese Pirate Confederation, led by the legendary Zheng Yi Sao. Her fleet operated under a strict code. According to that code, the only way a pirate could form a relationship with a female captive was through marriage, and he was required to remain loyal to her. Improper intimate activities were forbidden. On the surface, this might sound like protection, but it was not. It was control. In practice, the women seized in raids had no real choice. The pirate commander held absolute power over their status. The marriage served to legitimize his claim over her. It transformed her from captive into property wife. It regulated the behavior of the crew by marking her as off-limits to others. But it did not grant her freedom. It did not restore her agency. It bound her more tightly to the man who had taken everything from her. Marsh was transported first to the pirate base at Sal, then onward into captivity. Though her narrative focuses on her later survival and negotiation, it reveals a period of extreme vulnerability immediately following seizure. She was contained. She was powerless. She was at the mercy of men who saw her as an object. In the Barbary system, captives were held in slave markets or aboard corsair ships. Women were subject not only to ransom or sale, but to confinement in conditions that stripped them of movement and autonomy. Ships designed for cargo or male prisoners were repurposed to hold women, children, and the elderly. The conditions were cramped, unsanitary, and degrading. While much attention has been given to the forced labor or sale of captives, the confinement phase itself must be understood as a distinct stage of trauma. Women were rendered into human cargo. They were removed from any protective community or family structure. They were left biologically and socially exposed. The physical space, a dark hold beneath the deck with little light, fresh air, or privacy, became a liminal zone, a space between capture and fate, a space where hope withered and identity dissolved. After confinement came trade. Many women seized by pirates were not simply held. They were transferred, sold or gifted to powerful individuals, local warlords, sultans, governors. One striking example is Helen Gloag, a young Scottish woman captured in 1750. After her ship was overtaken by Moroccan corsairs, she was sold to a wealthy merchant. She was then presented to Sultan Sidi Mohammed ben Abdallah. She became his consort. Eventually, she became one of his principal wives. Her story illustrates how a female captive could be transformed into a political asset, a possession of value to a ruler, a piece in a larger game of power. In the broader structure of the Barbary trade, many women were placed in slave markets where they were sold into domestic servitude or concubinage by Muslim elites. The trade in captured women was part of a larger system of captive commerce. Women were treated as chattel. They were valuable both financially and socially. For the women caught in this system, the implications were profound. They were uprooted from their homes, transported across seas, parceled out to new owners who wielded total control over them. The transition from ship raid to market trade signified a shift from immediate physical danger to protracted structural bondage. Being traded to a warlord or elite meant lifelong status as a captive, often with no realistic prospect of freedom or return. Women became part of power networks in which they were both assets and liabilities. They were subject to conversion pressures, manipulation, forced assimilation into new cultural and religious frameworks. The ravages inflicted by pirate raids on women reveal more than isolated cruelty. They demonstrate how entire communities could be uprooted, how power was weaponized through violence, how the fates of women became entries in the ledger of global plunder and trade. When fragile coastal communities were shattered, the capture, forced servitude, and commodification of women became a hinge on which power dynamics and empires turned. These acts left scars not only on individuals, but on the fabric of civilization itself. History teaches that these episodes are not remote curiosities. They are echoes that continue to challenge our understanding of freedom, human dignity, and the cost of warfare. What must we learn from the women whose lives were reduced to bargaining chips in the pirates' ledger? They never simply survived. They bore witness. And through their suffering, the world was reshaped.